Sitting in his chair, Archie Bunker began to speak in 1971. The words he spoke caused a complete breakdown in American society. Not even the White House stayed out of it. Leaks of secret recordings revealed that Nixon himself sought to have the program outlawed. Up until Norman Lear bet it all on the most despised TV character in America, networks had always taken it easy. The impact of one man's racist tirades on television is revealed today. As Norman Lear perused Variety in the early months of 1967, he stumbled upon a brief synopsis of a British comedy series titled Till Death Us Do Part. It followed a grumpy working-class dad as he fought with his liberal son-in-law on a regular basis. Lear related to that description in some way. Despite not having viewed any episodes, he proceeded to purchase the rights. He thought the show was too severe for American television when he saw it for the first time, but the fundamental concept struck a chord. Based on his own life experiences, he created something fresh rather than just replicating it. Unlike other fictional characters, Archie wasn't born into a story. He was inspired in part by Lear's real father, who had a temper tantrum and resorted to yelling at his mother to control herself. An incredibly slothful white dude. Those expressions went on to become household names in the United States of America thanks to television. King Lear's risk paid off. It wasn't until 1968 that the show was first considered for American television. The pilot episode was shot for a BC and was titled Justice for All. In the roles of Archie and Edith, O'Connor and Gene Stapleton were cast. However, Justice was their last name in those days. The names of the other characters were also changed. Lionel Jefferson remained a character in the novel, and Michael Stevich was referred to as Dickie. An unexpected anniversary celebration turned into a heated debate on societal issues in the original pilot. However, a BC was unprepared. The show was rejected by the network due to concerns about its edginess and the lack of chemistry between the duo. Lear persisted. He sought financial backing from CBS and gave it another attempt. The name of the second pilot, which was shot in 1969, was Those Were the Days. O'Connor and Stapleton remained, while other parts were recast. The plot was very similar, but with a more gentler tone. Some minor adjustments were made. Edith was more aggressive, and Archie was made to feel a bit more exposed. Even though the iconic Manhattan skyline wasn't there yet, this version did introduce the theme tune that we now know and love. Even yet, CBS was slow to act. It took them a full year before they finally committed. Lear was instructed by them to change the name of the show to All in the Family and to rebrand the Bunker family from Justice. Lear consented. After all that time, it all made sense at that point. Things may have turned out quite differently in 1970 for a little time. Mickey Rooney was Norman Lear's first choice to play Archie Bunker. On the other hand, Rooney was taken aback when Lear detailed the character's racial remarks and scathing sentiments. He warned Lear that putting on such a display could lead to his execution. Claiming it was un-American, Rooney declined. Carol O'Connor, who would go on to become famous for the character, was able to land the part because of that decision. It was in a 1966 picture that O'Connor portrayed an ostentatious, brash army general that Lear initially took note of him. According to Lear, he could tell right once that O'Connor's visage belonged on TV. Lear was so impressed by O'Connor's audition that he imagined him playing Archie right away. But O'Connor wasn't convinced. He was afraid that the show would be a disaster and would only sign on if Lear offered to pay for his plane ticket back to Rome if the production was a fiasco. Despite the character's initially unlikable appearance, O'Connor became a household name, won 4 Emmys, and brought depth to the role. John Stapleton was also an important part of it. Lear recalled watching Stapleton in Damn Yankees on Broadway, which solved his casting dilemma for Edith. This was no ordinary performer reciting her lines. She detected Edith's latent strength during their initial encounter. She was aware that Edith frequently uttered a single line that inflated Archie's ego, despite her seeming ignorance. Even Edith's distinctive high-pitched voice was an original creation by Stapleton. A piece of television history was written with that voice. She remained for the entire run of the show, but she decided she didn't want to be a part of the spin-off after her role had finished airing and left after only a few episodes. Rob Reiner's journey to the show began in his childhood. His famous comedian father, Carl Reiner, was good friends with Norman Lear. "Your kid is really funny," Lear remarked Carl, after observing little Rob making jokes while playing jacks during their 1950s vacation. Carl was being rude and didn't notice. However, Lear recalled, Rob was cast by him as Archie's liberal son-in-law, Meathead, many years later. With the program, that connection continued. A number of Rob's early directorial endeavors, notably This Is Spinal Tap, were funded by Lear. "I would never have had a directing career that was Reiner's statement if Lear hadn't happened." The path that led Sally Struthers to play Gloria was unexpected in and of itself. Rob Reiner was cast before she ever auditioned. He was accompanied by his ex-girlfriend Penny Marshall, who was also trying out. Struthers didn't think she had a chance. There was bound to be chemistry between Penny and Rob as a pair. Also, Penny bore a striking resemblance to Jean Stapleton. Yet Struthers was cast in the role. Lear was asked by her, many years later, whether she had been the most hilarious actress. He declined her request. She claims that Lear told her she was cast for the part due to her round face and blue eyes. A la Carol O'Connor. In this approach, viewers would empathize with Archie more. His affection for his daughter would be plainly apparent. Viewers would still relate to Archie as a father figure, regardless of how much they despised his words. Even though it was a direct casting choice, it obviously paid off. Struthers continued on to appear in 157 episodes and was nominated for 2 Emmys during her tenure. But a catastrophe was the beginning. With high hopes for its 1969 sketch comedy show, Turn On, a BC broadcast it nationwide. However, stations around the nation quickly began pulling the plug. There was a Cleveland station that skipped right to the end. Basically, it was a furious message to a BC saying, "Don't do that again," and it pulled the broadcast after the first commercial break. Nobody liked it. Many people complained to a BC. The show was cancelled only 5 days after that. Since then, the network has been paralyzed with fear of airing even the slightest amount of controversy. Thus, a BC froze when Norman Lear arrived with a pilot regarding Archie Bunker, a brash, racist figure. Another catastrophe was the last thing they wanted to deal with. Aside from having firm views on everything, the protagonist also cursed and disrespected minorities. Turn On's debacle made a BC wary of repeating the same mistake. They decided not to air the show, but CBS had other plans. The Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres were cancelled as part of the house cleaning to make way for more grounded stories. More than simply relatives keeping an eye on the farm, they aimed to attract city dwellers of a younger generation. Once CBS saw an opportunity, they acquired the rights to Norman Lear's show, rebranded it as All in the Family, and cast Carol O'Connor, Jean Stapleton, Rob Reiner, and Sally Struthers in an updated version. But CBS still wasn't sure. As a trial run, they slapped the show into the late Tuesday night slot, immediately following Hee Haw. Just 13 episodes were ordered. Little was anticipated. January 12 followed. 1971. There was no easing into it from the pilot. It had a profound effect on them. Shortly after returning from church, Archie Bunker began a tirade. People were shocked when he said a series of insults in a single moment. Everything that Archie wanted to say was quickly uttered. He made his lack of filter quite apparent by insulting his wife and making fun of his son-in-law. It was the first of its kind to air on CBS. Even before the episode aired, they posted a disclaimer telling viewers that the show's purpose was to mock prejudice in order to highlight how absurd it is. As things unfolded, the network anxiously awaited the outcome. In preparation for the anticipated deluge of complaints, they dispatched additional phone operators. But then an odd thing occurred. They expected the phones to ring, but they didn't. Indeed, there were a few perplexed readers. Is the show returning? Several fans wondered. Curiosity, not wrath, washed over. Our nation did not go boom. It crouched down. Initially, the reviews were mediocre. Before reruns became popular, the show ranked 34th in its initial season. The news quickly circulated. The word got out, you really must watch this. An increasing number of viewers turned in during the summer. The CBS network took note. They rescheduled the whole family for 8 o'clock on Saturdays, when the new season began. Luxury real estate. The bet was successful. It was a total bombshell. It topped the nation by the end of the 1971-72 season. It wasn't content to linger for some time. It dominated for 5 years in a row. That had never occurred before. Each and every week. Watching Archie yell insults at anybody he could find, get into heated arguments with his family, and yet manage to uncover hidden truths about America drew millions of viewers. It was authentic, unfiltered, and unfiltered. There was a Christmas episode from 1976 that the producers of All in the Family worked on, but never got around to airing. The Draft Dodger was the name of the screenplay that one of the writers, Jay Moriarty, had created. However, it was subsequently shelved. His representative only informed him that Norman Lear was uninterested and never forwarded it. Truthfully, it was not true. The episode's big break came when Jimmy Carter announced his intention to pardon Vietnam draft dodgers during his presidential campaign. The script became more than merely divisive all of a sudden. Timely it was. The episode was set up to make a big splash. For Christmas dinner, Archie Bunker asked his friend Pinky Peterson over. Pinky was an exceptional parent. Vietnam had claimed his son's life. But then Mike surprised everyone by inviting his buddy David, a former draft dodger who had escaped to Canada, to join them. Dread permeated the air. Upon learning David's identity, Archie completely lost it. He anticipated that Pinky would be as enraged. No, Pinky refrained from acting aggressively. He instead uttered a word that sent shockwaves through the audience. Despite the loss of his son in battle, he assured Archie that he could relate to David's decision. "David is alive and well enough to join us for Christmas dinner," he proclaimed. He would also like to have a seat with Steve if he were here. That was a powerful moment. A TV line wasn't all it was. All of America's animosity towards Vietnam was channeled into a single family supper. Executives at CBS went sour when they eventually decided to run it. When Archie became furious over the war, his language became particularly offensive to them. The censors couldn't handle his one outburst where he insulted the Lord in vain. Therefore, they had Norman Lear provide a voiceover to the line. Rather, an uncomfortable and contrived sound emerged. "I am not referring to the conflict. I don't want to talk about that rotten dead one no more." Viewers noticed the audio didn't match, and the emotion felt clipped. It was a perfect example of 1970s TV censorship, trying to clean up something raw, but making it even more obvious. Lear had dealt with this before. He once said network execs would freak out even if only 50 or 60 people complained. In those days, that was enough to trigger edits. Then something happened that made the episode even more powerful. Just weeks after it aired, Jimmy Carter kept his campaign promise. On his very first full day in office, he signed Proclamation 4483. It gave unconditional pardons to all those who had dodged the Vietnam draft, whether they ran to Canada or simply never signed up. That meant hundreds of thousands of men could now return to the United States without facing charges. But not everyone was happy. Polls showed that only about 20% of Americans supported Carter's move. The country was still torn, just like the characters around Archie's dinner table. What Lear had aired on Christmas Day wasn't just a TV story anymore. It had become part of history. Fast forward to 2019. Norman Lear teamed up with Jimmy Kimmel to recreate classic episodes for a live audience. The special was called Live in Front of a Studio Audience, and it brought All in the Family back to life, with big names like Woody Harrelson as Archie and Jamie Foxx as George Jefferson. They used the original scripts, almost word for word, but when one scene included a racial slur, a BC bleeped it out, even though that word had once aired uncut in the 70s. It showed just how much things had changed. Lear had seen it coming. He'd already noticed that reruns on networks like Antenna TV were cutting or bleeping out language that once passed without question. Even in tribute, his work was still too raw for some viewers. Through it all, Norman Lear never backed down. He said it clearly, his goal was always to stir things up. That was the point. Born in 1922, he poured his life into these stories. Archie Bunker, for example, was inspired by his own father, someone who told Lear's mother to stifle herself. Lear didn't just want to provoke. He wanted to reflect what real families were going through. He once told a reporter, "I don't think I consciously thought that anything we were doing was controversial." But it was. He talked about things no one else dared to say on TV. Abortion, racism, war, religion. And he didn't flinch. In the early 1970s, American television had never seen anything like All in the Family. One episode after another, it smashed taboos and stirred up the country with its bold humor and raw honesty. Take The Bunkers and the Swingers, for example. It aired in 1972 and instantly caused a stir. Edith Bunker, sweet and naive as ever, answered a personal ad from a couple looking for new friends. She thought it was just about making company, but her daughter Gloria knew better. The ad came from a pair of swingers, people looking to swap partners. Before Gloria could explain it to her mother, the couple showed up early. That couple, Curtis and Ruth Rempley, were played with hilarious charm by Vincent Gardenia and Rue McClanahan. They came bearing expensive gifts, French perfume for Edith and fine cigars for Archie, thinking they were setting the mood. Meanwhile, the Bunkers, clueless as ever, took it all at face value. The guests misread every innocent comment as a flirtatious hint. At one point, Curtis admired Archie's master's chair and called Edith a wildcat in disguise. The tension between innocence and misinterpretation built the kind of slow, awkward comedy that made audiences squirm and laugh. It was classic, All in the Family, and fans loved it. Critics did too. The episode still holds a 9.0 rating on IMDb. Every actor in that episode eventually won an Emmy, a rare feat that speaks volumes. Just a year earlier, the show had gone even further with an episode called Judging Books by Covers. It was the first time American sitcom audiences saw a gay character on primetime television. The twist was clever. Archie mocked Mike's friend Roger for being effeminate, assuming he was gay. But later, the big surprise hit. Archie's own drinking buddy, a tough ex-football player named Steve, turned out to be the one who was actually gay. It flipped expectations in a way that was funny, but also powerful. Not everyone laughed. President Richard Nixon, of all people, caught that episode while looking for a baseball game on TV. His reaction was caught on the now famous White House tapes. He was furious. He called the episode pro-gay propaganda and wanted it off the air. That moment revealed just how deeply the show was shaking up the culture, even at the very top of government. But that was exactly the point. The show wanted to expose people's assumptions and make them think. Archie's logic in the episode was comically flawed. He said things like, "Guy who wears glasses is a four eyes. A guy who is a fag is a queer." The dialogue was written to reveal how ridiculous bigotry sounded when said out loud. 2 years later, another major moment arrived in the episode, Henry's Farewell. That's when viewers finally got to meet George Jefferson, a character who had only been talked about until then. It was a goodbye party for his brother Henry. But things didn't go smoothly. Archie refused to go to the Jeffersons' house, and George refused to come into Archie's. Eventually, they faced off, and sparks flew. It was a scene full of tension, but also humor and truth. For the first time, these two strong-willed men, each full of bias and pride, were forced to deal with each other face to face. Fast forward nearly 50 years to 2019, and that very episode was brought back to life in a special live TV tribute. Woody Harrelson played Archie. Jamie Foxx stepped into George Jefferson's shoes. Norman Lear himself, now in his 90s, introduced the show with Jimmy Kimmel. The recreation was a hit and won several Emmys. Some scenes were changed a little, like the one where Mike wears a prank flower and sprays Archie, which was cut from the live version. But the spirit remained. The fact that the episode still resonated decades later said a lot about the show's lasting power. That power, however, wasn't always used the way its creator hoped. Norman Lear had designed Archie Bunker to be a cautionary figure, a man stuck in the past whose views were meant to be challenged and corrected by younger, more open-minded characters like Mike and Gloria. But something strange happened. People started liking Archie. Not ironically, but truly.